and welcome to this tutorial on creating materials for this model of Anduril, which we created in our last tutorial. There's a link in the description if you missed that one. We're going to start off by opening a material editor, or a shader editor, and we're going to select the sword, or the blade rather, just the blade, and hold Z in the viewport and go down to Material Preview. And that will show us our materials, which are all white because there's nothing there yet. Down in the shader editor, we'll click New, and let's name it something like Blade. And we'll start by turning our metallic up to 1. That way it is a metallic shader rather than anything else. If you'll see, if we put roughness up all the way, it doesn't look very metallic, but if we put it down all the way, it's metallic. Let's start by adding a noise texture. And that is Shift A, just like adding an object. And let's take the scale of this down to something like 2. And really, I played with this quite a bit. And these are kind of the values I landed on. So what you come up with might be better in your case, might not. In order to make things a little easier in the material side of things, we're going to go to Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node Wrangler. If it's already checked, you're good to go. If not, go to Get Extensions, and you'll type the same here and enable it. This just gives us a bunch of shortcuts such as Control-Shift that make working with nodes a little easier. So Control-Shift-Click gives us viewport feedback of the node that we just clicked. So that is our noise at the moment, and it doesn't look like a noise texture. That's because we have no mapping or coordinate system attached to it. So Control-T with noise texture selected will give us both of those in one swoop. And we want the object coordinates to be the coordinate system. Now we're also going to scale this noise up quite a bit using the mapping. So let's select all of them and type 10. Again, this is just kind of what worked for me while I was experimenting with this. This gives you kind of a blotchy look. But back on the noise texture, let's turn our detail up all the way. If we zoom in, we'll see some slight differences. This roughness will keep where it is. Lacunarity can stay where it is, and distortion should remain 0. Let's also copy this noise texture and feed the same, well, we want to put a mapping node in it, but not the same mapping node. So we'll duplicate this as well. That's Shift D, just like duplicating any object. Take the object coordinates and put it in vector. Put this over here, and we're going to scale this a little differently. X and Y can stay the same. However, this is going to be very stretched out, and we're going to use a small value like 0.05 and Control Shift on there. We can see what we're actually doing. Again, it is subtle. So let me put in a color ramp just to show you what's going on. You can see that it's really making this streaked look. Let's get rid of that, Control X. We're going to mix these two together. And that's just a color mix node, or a mixed color node. And we're going to take the factor from each of these, plug them into A and B, and plug them into the color of principled BSDF. Control Shift Click. And that's not quite what we want yet, but it does give us kind of a blotchy look. Now, we want this same texture output here to feed our color, our roughness, and our bump. So let's go on to, we'll plug it into the roughness, but we do want a color ramp like I was showing you a few seconds ago to give us a little more contrast. So if we put this here, right in between, we can move our dark up a little bit for some more contrast, but we don't want our roughness to be 0. Black represents 0, and that is like that would look like chrome on a metal. So let's bring that up somewhere here. Looks all right for now. And let's bring in a bump node. And feed the same mixed texture into height. And put the normal socket into normal. And that looks awful. However, we're going to take that all the way down to 0.02. And another detail that I missed way back here is that we want this to be a little bit higher of a value for our streaked version. And we want our mix factor to favor the streaked side more than the blotchy side. And so that metal looks a whole lot better. Now, one thing I've noticed that I've been looking at this whole time is this fuller does not look correct for a sword. And I think right now what I'm going to do is just show you how to remedy that little issue. So with the blade selected, go to the modifiers tab and turn off the Y on the mirror. Now, here you'll see we have this kind of supporting ring down through here. Actually, if I turn off our subdivision surface, it'll be easier to see. There's a edge loop here that we actually want to get rid of. So let's go down here all the way at the bottom, and double tapping G allows edges and vertices to slide. So if we double tap to where they stop and look at the top, see how that turned out. That looks all right to me. Now, I did not have auto merge turned on, so now we have geometry on top of each other. Just select all vertices, bring up the merge menu with M, and merge by distance. Now we can see if, yeah, that's looking like overlapping stuff merged now. Let's check the very bottom, which would be the other place where it'd be likely to mess up. And that looks all right. I think I'll remove this edge just so we keep all quads here. Same here. And now if we turn on subdivision, that looks better. And we'll bring this down on the Z just a tad. And then another thing that is causing a problem, you'll see once I turn on the mirror, is this kind of overlapping stuff, or rather geometry running into each other. We can select everything but the very last segment here. So all the way down here. And we'll move it out just a tad on the Y. A little bit. Now when we turn our mirror back on and our subdivision, we get a nice curved fuller in there. All right, that is it for the blade for now. Let's move on to the hilt. Now for the hilt, we're going to be downloading a standard PBR texture set. So let's start our new material and call it hilt. And Control-Shift-T will give you the option to just add an entire set of textures without having to browse for each one or dragging each one in. But let me show you where we're going to get that texture set. We're going to browse to ambientcg.com and search for metal 055A. I found that this is a pretty good texture all on its own. So download that. I went with the 2K JPEG because of file size. Once you've downloaded those textures, back in Blender, we can click our Principled BSDF, Control-Shift-T, and select our textures that we need. Now, we don't need all of these, and we have two options for normal. We want the OpenGL normal. That is what Blender uses. We'll need the roughness, we'll need the metalness, and the color. Click this button, and you've got all these nodes added for you already. Now, what I do want to change a little bit, or a lot of it, is this look. It just looks like a generic metallic surface, and we downloaded textures. The reason for that is simply that we need to change our coordinate system. We're going to go to Object, and it's a little different, but we're not quite there. On each of these textures, we're going to have to change them from flat, which is what you would use with a UV coordinate system, to box. We'll just do that on each of these. We're going to change the blend value to something like 0.2. And with your cursor over that value, press Control C, and that will copy. And with your cursor over the next one, hit Control V and put it in each of them. Now we're almost there. This is too low of a resolution. So the way we're going to resolve that is by scaling up a bit. And we're probably not going to go past 5, I'm guessing. Yeah, somewhere around 5 looks pretty good. Now we want that same material to be up here on the pommel. So select the pommel, shift select the guard, and hit Control L for link data and link materials. And there we have the same material in both places. If you modify it on one, it'll modify it on both. So that was pretty simple. With that, let's move on to our leather grip. This is going to be a matter of a simple UV unwrap and another texture set from ambientcg.com. So let's go over to ambientcg.com. Let's search for leather, and I liked this one, number 26. Again, I went with the 2K JPEG set. So go ahead, download that. Back in Blender, let's create a new material for this grip and make sure the grip is selected first. And we'll call this leather or grip. Let's call it grip. Doesn't really matter. It just lets us know what it is we're looking at. Select our principled BSDF, Control Shift T, and get the textures that you just downloaded. In this case, we're going to need color, normal GL, and roughness. Again, normal DX is not what we're using in Blender, and displacement is not really required for what we're doing here. Now that we have all of this added in, we're going to keep this on UV coordinates. And the only thing we may need to change is the scaling. However, we need UVs for this to map to. So let's go into local view, that is / on the numpad, and hit tab. And I'm going to go to solid shade mode. And let's select one semi-sharp edge the whole way down. Control E will bring up our edge menu, and M will mark seam. That is the only seam we'll need to mark in order to unwrap this. So in face selection mode, select everything. And first, we'll want a UV editor. There we go. So now we have a UV editor. Everything is selected here. Hit U for the UV unwrap menu. And we'll just hit unwrap, the most basic standard way of doing things. Now this is kind of curled in all kinds of weird directions, and that won't make for great seams. So what we want to do is take one rectangle that is fairly rectangular already, and I think we'll go with this top left one. And we're going to take a vertex, and with snapping on and set to vertex, we'll move it on the X and snap it to the one below it. Snap it and move it on the Y and snap it to the one to the right. And we'll do the same thing here. All right, now with this one face that we fixed, select it, then hit A for select all, and you'll see that is your primary selection. We can right click and say follow active quads, and you'll see that it all straightened out. So let's move it to fit within our UV space. And actually, let's switch this pivot point to 3D cursor, or 2D cursor rather. move our UV map as close to that as we can without going out over the edge. All right. And then we'll scale it up from there to kind of hit the edge. There we go. So that gives us the largest possible UV map for that space on a square UV. So tab out of here and let's close our UV editor and go back to material preview. Now we can see that we have leather. However, this may not look correct on your screen. It does not look correct on mine. I have ridges where there should be scratches. And that is because the normals on this object, I believe, are reversed. The way we can check that is by going out into object mode and select our overlays menu, go to face orientation, and that is the problem. Blue is the correct orientation, so that's the out side of a face. Red is the inside side of a face, and we can fix that pretty easily by tabbing into edit mode, select all faces, and hit Shift N for recalculate normals. If that does not recalculate, check this little box that says inside here, and it'll flip from what it was. So there we go. Let's turn off that alarming blue. And if we zoom back in, our scratches now look like scratches. That may be a bit small. So let's play with our scale a bit. You can scale it to what you think looks good for you. 0.3 looks all right, I think. So that is the basics of the materials for our sword, for Anduril. However, Anduril has two other features which we have not yet added. One is that inside these little triangular areas and up here, there is a brass or a gold color. So we want to add that. And the other feature is, or two features really, is an inscription around here and an inscription on this blade. So we'll move into that now. We'll start by adding the inscription on the hilt, or rather on the pommel, that is this portion of the hilt. And what we want to do first, in order to do that, is to UV unwrap part of it. So we're going to go here, select this ridge, as well as the inner side of it as well. And hit Control E and M to mark those seams. And before we go any further, we need to apply our mirror modifier on the X-axis only. So what we're going to do is turn off Y, and we will apply our modifier. Now, of course, we don't have a mirror modifier at all anymore, so we need to add it again. Generate mirror only on the Y and put it at the beginning of the stack. So now you'll see that our geometry is actually real on both sides. It's not split down the center as being geometry on one side and just an instance on the other. Let's open up our UV editor. So now that we can see this texture, let's go here. And really the texture that's showing here doesn't matter. We're just interested in the space that this is taking up. All right, so let's select, so we've selected this entire region where the inscription will be. Hit U and unwrap. Now, so with our 2D cursor as the pivot point, turn off snapping, we don't need that. Select everything and rotate that to a point where it looks like it's right on the edge all the way up. And then move it on the X 0.5, that's halfway across. And move our cursor over here. So Shift S, cursor to selected, and select everything again and scale it till we're right on the edge. There we go. That's pretty good. Now we'll just kind of squeeze that over there, make this a little bigger. In the description of this video, you'll find links to two images, that is pommel inscription and blade inscription. These are two different styles of text from the Lord of the Rings universe. In the film version, both of these were used. And so that's where I'm drawing my inspiration for these. I've taken the text and already warped it into the shapes we need, and I've blended them from black to white to make them look like a better inscription or engraving. With those downloaded, you're going to take the pommel inscription file, just drag it straight into your node editor, and we'll do Control T with our node wrangler enabled to give us our mapping nodes. This node is going to drive our bump. So let's add a bump node right now. And that goes just between the normal map node and the shader itself. And we'll take our color output and go to height. Two things have to change. One is this sRGB color space needs to go to non-color. And this repeat is really the extension method. And we'll turn that to extend. And our mapping node will turn to texture. And you can see that showing up. However, it's not right. We'll need to stretch it, or we'll need to scale it up and down and move it up and down to kind of position it. To do that, we're going to use the scale and location values here. Dragging up over 3 values will allow you to adjust them all at once. So if you move left and right with your cursor still held down, you'll see that the scale is changing on all 3 X, Y, and Z. However, those changes are pretty extreme. So if you hold Shift, that will change in more slight measures. You'll need to play with this for a little while. And this is honestly going to be kind of the more frustrating part of this, because maybe not frustrating, but it takes a little while to get it kind of lined up the way we want. That will probably work pretty well there. We want to keep this away from the center area because we will be adding our brass, gold looking metal in the middle here. And we're going to be doing that to all of the ends of our hilt. To do that, we'll need to add some more geometry in our inner ring here. So Control Space over the editor, we'll bring it to full screen. Tab into edit mode, Alt A to deselect everything, and press K to bring up the knife tool. This snaps to edges and vertices. If we hold Shift, it will snap to the center of faces, or rather the center of edges. Let's just bring that around to, say, there actually. And up here, at any point you can let go of the Shift key and it will just go back to its normal snapping to edges and vertices. That is what I did down here. At any point when you hit Enter, it will now make that new topology real. I'm going to go to shaded solid mode and turn on X-ray mode with Alt Z. Now I can take some of these vertices and just kind of slide them around. And that is double tapping G if you've forgotten. That looks pretty good. They're not exactly symmetrical to each other, but it's not going to matter a whole lot. So let's grab our new edge loop and go out of X-ray mode. And we're also going to want to go back to material preview. And I think we may find that, yes, this bit of topology is now in the way of our inscription. If we double tap G, we can slide it in without affecting the UV map, which is great. That was not always the case. All right, so now that that is moved out of the way, we can bevel it just a little bit and go up one tick on the scroll wheel to give us a central ring, and select that central ring. Use Alt S to scale on the normal of the faces that those edges inhabit. Just a little bit, and make sure that this entire area down the center is still set to a bevel weight of 1. And that looks like it fits pretty well now. So let's go over to the two ends of the guard and do the same thing. While we're in fast forward here for a few seconds, now's probably a good time to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and probably turn on that notification bell so you don't miss another update. Let's hop over to Ambient CG again and download Metal 048B or something that looks like it. I just like this one in my case. And again, in my case, I went with a 2K JPEG set. Download that and hop back to Blender. Back in Blender, we want to make sure that we have either our pommel or our guard selected. And this is the material that we've been working on all this time. And what we're going to do is, in this side panel, actually, let's grab properties and drag it over this little window again. We don't really need it anymore. And on our materials tab, let's head over here and we see our materials, or our material slots rather. We can add a second slot, and there's no material in that slot yet. We can click new here or here. Either one doesn't matter. And we'll call it brass or gold, whatever describes that best. Control-Shift-T, select color, metalness, normal GL, and roughness. Let's make sure our viewport is in material preview mode. And in edit mode, let's grab the faces that we want the gold to be on. So in face selection mode, I'll select that ring, and Control+ will expand. I expanded twice. And here, again, on the right-hand panel, click Assign. Now that metal is assigned to just those faces. So again, that's object coordinates is what we want to use, and change all of these to a box projection. Also, we may need to scale that up again, or scale it up to something similar to what the rest of the hilt is at. That looks reasonable. Let's try a little further. Yeah, that looks all right to me. It is smooth metal. It just has to have something there to make it not quite so plain. Again, up on our pommel, we'll do the same selection. Expand our selection with Control+, and that is plus on the numpad, not the other plus. We'll need to again add the second material slot, and in this dropdown, since it already exists, we can select our brass and assign. And there we go. There's nothing more to that. We've completed the gold and plain metal, steel, whatever it might be, sections of the sword along with its engraving. However, there is one last engraving to do before we can call that finished, and that is the blade. So let's make sure we have selected our blade, and we need to do some unwrapping. You're an old pro at this by now, so you should know what we're doing, but we have our UV editor open here. End tab, or tabbing into edit mode, we see that we have our blade kind of in quarters. So we need to apply our mirror on the X and hit apply here. There we go. And while we're thinking about it, add that right back in. but only on the Y, and move it to the top of the stack. Now we have our blade back, but we have our full width. Now we do need to UV unwrap this in order for our texture to show up here for our engraving. So what we need to do is grab this edge and the same on the other side here. Make that bigger so you can see with YouTube's poor video quality that we have this edge and the same on the other side. Control E, M will mark those seams. And now we can tab into or select face mode with 3 and select everything. Now we can go back here, and now that we can see our UV editor, we'll see what happens here. We hit U, unwrap. Let's control space, make that full screen, rotate this negative 90 degrees. So you can select anything and hit R to start your rotation tool. Type how many degrees you want to rotate and hit enter, and it'll do it. I'm just using grab and scale to position this to a point that's roughly in the center, but takes up as much space as we can without going over the bounds. Right there, that fits within the bounds of our UV space. Tab back into object mode and shift our focus down to the material editor. And we will drag in our engraving. Hit Control T to add our mapping nodes that are required here. We're changing point to texture, sRGB to non-color, repeat to extend, and keeping UV as the vector here. Let's add another bump. We can duplicate this, but we've changed values. So Shift A, search, bump, put that right in between here. You can add multiple bumps right into each other, and that's what we're going to do here. After a while, it doesn't look very good, but 2 is just fine. So take color and put that into the height of our new bump node. Put that up here where we can see it. And let's go back to where we can see our viewport. It's there, but it's way too big. So let's go into front view with 1 on the number pad, Shift 4 a few times until it's rotated 90 degrees. And let's scale our texture until it fits. Again, this is more of the same. We are scaling, moving, just getting that texture file to fit just right so that our engraving is just in the fuller of the blade. Sometimes you may have to actually manually type in some values because even using Shift, the fine tuning isn't fine enough. But once it fits, you can safely say that you are done texturing or making materials for Anduril from Lord of the Rings. Now, this is only the real-time view of our materials. So if you want to hang around with me for a few more minutes, we're going to add a world texture and maybe some lighting and make this look a little better. So in order to do that, let's go to our world tab. In our color section, we're going to change this to environment texture, and we'll click on open here. Here we can select an HDRI of our choice. I like this Calais interior. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but there's a link in the description. Now, if we hit Z up, and that is rendered view, you can see that we have a sword in a meeting room. We can go to render, film, transparent. Now our background is transparent, and our blade is not quite matching up with our hilt. But I can show you a quick way to fix that, and that is our roughness section of our material. So if we go to the shader editor again, with that selected, this color ramp is where we fix that. Let's bring down the roughest bit down to here. And, oh, you know what? That may be enough right there. We can make our smoothest parts a little smoother. That matches up with the hilt a little better. But again, you can toy with this until everything looks just perfect for your scene. But there it is. Anduril from Lord of the Rings. But wait, what kind of Lord of the Rings themed video would this be if we didn't have 20 different endings? I have one last thing. These are all separate objects, and we still have modifiers unapplied on them. We're not going to apply them all. However, with our cursor at the center of the world, and if you accidentally moved it at some point, Shift S will give you the option to bring the cursor to world origin. Let's add an empty, and we're going to add a sphere. Over in the properties for that empty, which is this, we can change this size down to something a little more reasonable looking. The size, visual size of it doesn't really matter. It's just for you. Pressing A will select everything while keeping that empty as your primary selection. Control P brings up the parenting menu and will set parent to the object while keeping the transform. Now, when we move this around, everything follows. If we rotate, everything rotates with it like one object. In your scene outliner, you'll see that all of these objects nest under this empty. So let's call this empty Anduril. There you go. That actually is the end of this tutorial. So thanks for hanging in with me this long. That's all I have for today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Carl with Blender Forge. Happy blending.